How's everybody doing? Yeah? Me too. So last night, Michael Bolton told me, I said, I'm following the keynote, the headliners today, and so I guess we can add another category to animals and babies who not to follow, because I get to talk about software testing again, not a very interesting podcast and all their funny jokes. So my name's Keith. I'd like to thank Jeff Perkins again for having me back this year. Last year and now this year as well, Jeff has picked my topic. So if the talk isn't interesting to you, you can blame him again. I'm going to talk to you today about debugging your test team. I like to walk, but I'm going to hit this table here. So before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about context. So I've been working in software testing for whatever that guy said it was, 20-odd years. And running primarily in financial services, investment banking. I worked at Barclays for a while, Citigroup, UBS Investment Bank, running large kind of test outsourcing centers and testing teams all over the place. And I think it's important to understand people's context, particularly if they're standing up and trying to tell you that they know something. So my background is in financial services and software testing. I've kind of worked my way up from a test analyst through to running large test organizations. After I left Barclays, I started consulting for a couple years, and now primarily what I do is do management consulting around test process improvement, test automation, and do some test outsourcing as well, so we can supply testing teams. But the context that I do that in is what I call enterprise tech. And enterprise tech is your primary business is not technology, but you build a lot of technology. And so these are places like banks, right? Their business isn't banking. You could make arguments that, particularly in electronic trading, could you really do that without technology anymore? But their primary business isn't technology, right? And so what happens in enterprise tech is a lot of these organizations, insurance, banking, pharmaceuticals, they become like this conglomerate of different teams and acquisitions. They also, I sometimes call them places where good ideas go to die. The guy from Forrest here yesterday who had that whole list of bad agile practices that haven't been implemented, like all down at the bottom. That's my world, right? So, and I think the technical term he was looking for was wagile, where you combine agile and actually one of my clients uses that. So I want you to get to know a little bit about who I am. And one of the things that I do a lot and have done is review test teams and try and look for ways we can improve. And so what I want to talk to you today about is my model I use for trying to figure out if our test team, we're getting enough value out of it, if we're serving the business needs, and the ideas I go through that, and the three primary bugs that I have found over my years in test teams. So is that all right? Yeah, it doesn't matter because we're going down that road anyway. So here we go. So first of all, when you're treating something, you want to treat the disease, not symptoms, right? And if I can paraphrase Jerry Weinberg in Secrets of Consulting, the first rule is there's always a problem. The second rule is it's always a people problem, right? And no matter what kind of process, tool, anything you want to try and implement, and I know I'm at a tool conference, so don't throw things at me yet, but no matter what you want to do there, the underlying problem is your context and it's org dysfunction. That's what's really causing you problems. And what's your biggest contributor to your context? Anybody? People. Did somebody say people? I think they did. Yeah, so people, right? And what's wrong with people? Don't ask my family, right? So what's wrong with people, right? People are messes. They're a hot mess, right? We don't communicate well. We don't share information. We have competing agendas. We don't talk and we're not clear. We've got all sorts of different ideas about what's happening. And that's kind of root of a lot of this stuff. And what do people do in an organization that we call a job or work? They get paid for doing things, right? So the biggest determining factor of whether or not your tool implementation process improvement initiative is going to be successful is how people are comped. And I was having a really interesting discussion with, I'm not going to remember her name, but my new friend from Disney last night. which is really a shame because I'm on a panel with her later today, so I'll remember you. But we were talking about how budgeting works in enterprise tech and the game that it is, and it drives all sorts of behavior dysfunction, and that's the kind of root cause. So when I first start looking at a project to try and figure out if we can improve the test process, the first thing I want to get to is the financials, right? So I'm working with a client right now that we're talking about supplying a test team to them, building a test automation harness, all this kind of sexy stuff. But when I started talking to them, the first thing we talked about is you are in the middle of trying to do an agile transition, right? How is this project financed? Because that's going to drive all the behavior. And that's kind of the root cause of this WAGIL phenomenon that's happening in enterprise tech, where we want to do sprints and Scrum and do daily releases and CI/CD and all the other kind of sexy accoutrement to Agile, but yet we still want to budget on an annual basis with quarterly reviews and claw back extra spend and cross-charge, which is what drives people's behavior. And if you don't believe me, work in an investment bank that that gives an annual bonus and find out when October rolls around how much product has been delivered to the business, and the decisions that a developer will make will be highly compromised, right? So that's kind of the root cause of what I want to get to is how are things financed. Once I figure out that, the next thing I want to do is talk to the business about risk. So the model I'm going to draw up here, and I've used this in kind of training and working with test managers, my management team for a long time. And I've never actually presented it publicly, and it's old school kind of management consultancy. But the primary thing I want to focus on is risk. And when I say risk, I mean business risk, not project risk and not product risk. I want to talk about risks to the business. So this is the lens that I look at and try and filter the information that comes out of testing back to the business, right? And I'm going to probably take some heat for drawing the old cost-quality time triangle, but it works, right? So when I talk to the business, the first thing I want to try and understand around quality is accuracy, right? And I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and every year I try and give the same talk because I'm terrible at remembering what I want to say. And I was challenged one year by my friend Michael Bolton, who's talking later today. He was listening to one of my many rants on the phone about quality in the industry, and I said, I could sum up my whole opinion about how the business and technology feel about quality in 3 phrases, and it was, they suck, you suck, and we suck, right? And so he challenged me to put that in a slide and present it, and I did. And so now I kind of have this challenge every year for a slide that no one would ever want to stand in front of. Nobody wants to have their picture taken and put on the internet in front of a slide that says, you suck, right? So last year it was, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. And so we'll get to my favorite one later. But anyway, when I'm talking about quality, right, I want accuracy because it's amazing to me how few teams talk about what quality actually means. In that example I used just earlier, like a developer's view of quality is highly subjective, right? And it's all sorts of other factors that may be different from mine, might be different from the project managers. What's the easiest way and most efficient way to find out what your project and business teams mean by the word quality? Ask them, right? You have to get used to talking about quality. And so what I want to do is give them information that comes out of testing that helps kind of triangulate all that stuff so we have a good idea. Lots of teams talk about release criteria. We might want to say, we want to have 0 critical bugs. We want to have the backlog down to X. We want to do all this stuff, but we don't really talk about what folks mean by quality so they can get a relative view of that. When it comes to time, what I want to focus on from a testing perspective is efficiency, right? And what's the easiest way to save time on testing? Do less of it, right? Most people will shout out automation, right? And that is, I'm again probably going to get hate tweeted for saying this, but in my experience, automation adds to time, right? It adds to cost. There's a lot of people out there, and I kind of rail about this in the industry a little bit, that view it as a silver bullet. And I was loving to hear Angie Jones talk yesterday about having your business involved in your automation strategy. One, I help that thinks that manage their expectations of what they can get out of that, but also helps focus your test strategy on business objectives. So what I want to do is be extremely judicious with the time that we have allocated. And I want our business to understand that if there's a type of test we think we need to run, it's going to take X amount of time, so let's prioritize. It's almost taking the kind of risk-based strategy to another level and focusing it on the business, right? So when it comes to time, I want to talk about efficiency. When it comes to cost, I want to be transparent, right? And in my experience, the only currency that the business trades in when it comes to cost is headcount. So if you are going to go back to your business, and that's why I don't get involved in theoretical saves, right? So you can say, oh, well, and this was, again, a bit of the snake oil around test automation for a long time. You had 10,000 test cases, you automate, 8,000 of them. It used to take, 6 months, now it only takes a month, right? There's a lot of kind of non-science in that, and it's a theoretical save. So if I'm not literally handing a check back to the business that says, here, you can claw this back, or that we can use less people on a future project, I don't get into how much money I save through process improvement. What I want to focus on is headcount, right? Because managed headcount is the primary currency that enterprise tech trades in. So I want to be super transparent about what things cost, right? So all these things together, as a manager or leader, I'm trying to constantly refocus the information that comes out of testing through this lens so I can speak the language of my business to help guide them through, decisions they need to make, right? Are y'all with me? All right, here we go. So the first bug, and my first slide, I don't think you want to have your picture taken in front of, is I don't think deeply about my work. So this is a very, very common bug, right? The symptoms for this bug are a kind of general malaise in your testing team. They're getting stuff done, but just getting done. These are the poor souls that are constantly, year after year, having to justify their existence. There's lots of questions about their value. I think Paul mentioned the World Quality Report yesterday. I'm trying not to shudder when I say it, but the World Quality Report, which there's some good information there, but these are the folks that look at, their big outsourced test engagements, the dreaded test center of excellence, right? So, and it's just kind of like things are happening, but they're not really happening. So when I see stuff like that, I'll get into some areas of Inquisition for me, and that's where you primarily see this bug manifesting itself is in your people, right? And these are the folks that can't talk about their business in terms of the business. They only talk about their business through an application or tech filter, right? I think, and if you haven't read the book, Rethinking Expertise, you absolutely should, particularly if you're in a management position by Harry Collins, that about this idea of interactional expertise and that you should be able to speak the language of something without being an expert in it. And folks that can't or don't understand their business, this is a common symptom with that. Also, they can't model their user base, right? They might be afraid to talk to their user base. I'm working with a client right now that used an outsourced provider that had a center of excellence, and we're replacing that team right now. And the primary reason is they were implementing a workflow management system, and they came in and had a center of excellence around that actual CRM system and just deconstructed everything from a functional level into, it's amazing people still do this stuff, right? Deconstructed it into 25,000 test cases, didn't spend any time with the business, didn't understand how they were actually going to use it. When it came time to implement it, guess what? They weren't able to do that translation with their users, so they can't make that translation, right? The other big thing I try and press on with people, and again, I find it amazing that this still happens, is that people ask them how they stay current with the industry. our business is, relatively young. A lot of what you need to learn or you need to know isn't taught in a kind of real university level kind of curriculum. And even the certification tracks are kind of very shallow. So you have to read. You have to, I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, people who are at a tech conference, but you have to go out and seek information. You just ask somebody when you're interviewing them, right, what's the latest book you read, either about testing or a book that influenced how you test? 9 times out of 10, they're like, you get the homina routine, right? Because people aren't interested. And that's a huge, huge issue. If you're not doing the work to perfect your craft, you're going to have problems. So the next bug that I find is what I call I don't trust my team, right? And there's a funny story related to this. And this is a hard one, right? This has got deep roots. And it's easy to diagnose, but it's hard to treat. And frankly, we'll stay on this analogy. A lot of times it's terminal, right? They're not going to make it. And this is where the process weenies and kind of QA cops, hang out. This is where these people live. And when I first took over I ran the Barclays Global Test Center. And when I first took over, I moved out to Singapore with my family, and the team was kind of there and split between India. And the guy who was running it at the time was ex-Motorola, but on the device side. So it was all manufacturing. I mean, literally, we were an investment bank technology team that had names like, for the equities trading team was Unit 2, and we were like, the test team was Unit 7, and every day, this guy would reprint, and I can't even imagine how much paper they wasted, but on their main conference room, he would reprint these gigantic sheets of every unit, all the work they had done, right? So, it was like how many test cases you ran, how many you executed against your schedule, how many, the giant Gantt charts, right? And so when I first joined, I started working for this woman named Julie Evans, who, she knew what I was like when she hired me because she kind of wanted to kind of blow up the system a little bit. So after about 2 weeks there, I said, I am not doing this, we're not doing that. I gave it 2 weeks to look at. I said, there's no way we are going to produce all that, paper, right? So she said, okay, fine. So I went and talked to this guy, and I said, look, I hate to tell you, but we're not doing your metrics anymore. From today, the team is stopping. This guy was so incensed that he did this. He was there for another 6 months before he finally quit. He still produced a Unit 7 paper, but it said, left intentionally blank. So every day we'd walk past our stats were left intentionally blank. But he didn't make it. But that's the kind of mentality around that. And where I see this kind of manifests itself is in your process, right? And as much as I feel like this industry is going to reboot itself, it's still kicking around. This client I was just working with, 25,000 test cases. What does that mean? And testers left to their own devices, a lot of them just want to count shit. And that's where you see that stuff. People who are overly focused on flow charts, Gantt charts, swim lane diagrams, and you want to press on that and find out, is this really, helping us get our work done, or is it helping you keep a divide? People with this kind of, this bug, look at testing as a role, not as an activity. And one of the things that I really like about the DevOps movement is that it's shining a lot of light on testing across the entire life cycle, which, to be honest, we haven't really had that kind of support in the past from development teams, particularly in enterprise tech. And what that does to me is that helps me make decisions about what to test if I can see what they've tested before, being, again, judicious with our resources. So the last bug that I see people have is this bug I call I don't like testing, right? And this one is hard to diagnose, right? Because you'd think if you worked in testing, you'd like it. And I really believe a lot of people who work in testing don't like it, right? And you'll see these folks, and they're really into, and I'm not commenting on it, but maybe, I'm not commenting that, but like people who want to be called an estet, right? Or people who, are really into test-first development, or they're into this whole team automation, all those types of things, which in themselves aren't inherently bad, but I think they can drive bad behavior, right? So they look like they like testing, but they really, really don't. And where I see this bug kind of show its ugly head is in your use of technology, right? And I'm going to paraphrase Michael Bolton a little bit here again, where he calls, you see people have like tool fetishes, right? Where everything starts to look like their favorite nail, right? So they can just go, it's a tool-first problem-solving process, which is, not entirely helpful when you're trying to drive business value, right? So people are very, very focused on tools. The other thing I see with folks like this is that they can't defend their work, right? And I like to challenge people on the decisions that they make. And a lot of times, and I've said this phrase before, I've attended countless automation reviews. And the first question I always ask people is, what would happen if we stopped running this? And typically you get that, and I'll, again, date myself a little bit here with the RCA dog analogy. They go like, they've heard the master's voice for the first time. So they're sitting there going like, I don't know what would happen. Well, do we understand what this test is doing? What information am I getting from this test? They can't defend their work under that level of scrutiny, right? And that's not a good thing. You should be able to get up and say why you're doing something, what business value this test is adding, why we've automated it. And people who don't like testing and just want to get straight into answers, I think testing reveals more questions than it does answers. They don't like living in that kind of gray morass, the gray ocean grayness, the Jackson Pollock painting, that you're kind of swirling around in. They're not comfortable with that. And the other trait that I'll press on for folks that I suspect don't like testing is they don't like pedantic arguments. And I think good testers and the great testers that I've met all love pedantic arguments because you're getting to what somebody means. And that's a big part of testing, right? Is trying to understand what people mean. And people who don't like pedantic arguments just want to get to an answer, right? And I think the more, they don't have what Richard Feynman called the joy of finding things out. They just want to get there and get back to their tool as opposed to trying to learn something on the way. And I'll give you an example of that. I was looking at the internets the other day, and I saw this guy I don't know was going to regurgitate a 10-year-old argument with a bitter old man, and I was going to listen to it, and I just didn't. And I was very happy that I finally did that. But the argument that they're going to have was about good practice versus best practice. And they're arguing about this whole thing, and what they're really doing is missing the point entirely. Because the point isn't about the words that you use, the point's about why you choose those words and why in your context those words work, right? So, but I don't think either one of those guys actually like testing, right? So that's the last bug there. So how do you fix some of this stuff? You can't. So my advice on this, right? So the first one is, focus on business risk, right? If your test strategy is not aligned directly to risks to your business, in my opinion and experience, you're doing it wrong. If you want to be more valued by your business, make sure you can draw a direct line from your test approach to a risk, right? And multiple, there can be multiple lines, but it's something that the business is going to be able to understand. That will clarify a lot of the test approach. It will clarify why you're doing things, and it will also cut out a lot of the signal versus noise ratio that just software projects generate. There's a lot of noise that gets generated from developing software. Focusing on business risk will cut through a lot of that for you. The next thing I would do is make sure the objectives for your team are based on principles, not goals. And what I mean by that is, so the objectives that I set for my management team at Barclays, we focused on things like honesty, integrity, and accountability, right? And I literally wrote these into the online Barclays HR system. And what I asked my team to do was then go show me and demonstrate to me throughout the year, right, and we would check in monthly, how your work was demonstrating those principles. I didn't care what you were doing. I wanted to see those principles demonstrated in your work. And that drove some people out. They couldn't deal with that. They wanted to know, I want to produce 20 widgets a month, and I want to be able to produce 22, so you'll give me more money, right? But the people who stayed, my attrition went down, they were happier, we got more done, we were more productive, because I was giving them the freedom to kind of design their own path for how to show that they were doing that work, right? And that also cuts out a lot of the nonsense around, I don't like to test, or I don't understand my business, because people are trying to show you how they're doing those things themselves. The next thing I would recommend is just fire your test managers. Who's a test manager here? Yeah, you're out. So I say this, mildly tongue-in-cheek, right? But the idea of a test manager and how it's been executed in our business is just awful, right? It is the epitome of the higher I get up, the less I'm actually associated with my craft, right? The less testing I actually do, right? And so that whole little layer there, what I call operational test managers, these are managers of managers, or what I like to refer to at UBS as the coloring in boys. They're the process weenies, the people who want spreadsheets and want to be able to show you how many test cases they ran and all the colors on it. And by the way, our business has a long way to go from a tool perspective on doing some genuine reporting that's story-based and not numbers-based. Hint, hint. So I would say 9 times out of 10, those folks won't survive in this environment I'm describing, right? So I would get rid of them, right? But also the point is to refocus your most senior, smart, experienced people on testing, not on managing, right? My rule for test managers is you are 80% hands-on. If you can't manage a team, and I managed we had 1,700 testers in my Barclays team. I managed that whole group with 5 direct reports, and they all had to do testing themselves, right? If you can't get your management, operational function down to about 20% of anybody's time, you are doing it wrong. You need to lean that up. And I know enterprise IT loves meetings, but you can control your own world, right? You don't need anybody's permission to do your job better, right? So I would refocus that. And the last thing I would tell you is just keep going through this cycle. Refocus on the business, make sure your objectives are principled, and get rid of the folks that aren't with the program, because at the end of the day, I'm not a strong believer in top grading, but I definitely think that you're kind of either up or you're on your way in or you're on your way out. And I would rather, deal with people who are that one or that's, kind of not pulling the same direction can really do a lot of damage to the rest of the team. So with that, I think I'm done.
All right, we have some questions for Keith, and we're going to take some questions from the audience as well. So if you have some questions from the audience, go ahead and raise your hand for Keith, and I will come by, and here we go. All right.
Hi there.
Wait a minute, first, were you a test manager?
I am.
Okay. Get out of here.
Can I be here? So I do test still. I really do test still, but my question is, directly related to that, actually, can you give us some suggestions on how to make management leaner so that we can stay focused on the craft of testing?
Yeah, so what I would do, I would take a month, right? And I did this as a practice all the time, when I was like managing a large team. Right now my team's, like 25, 30 odd people, so it's a smaller thing, but I'm doing kind of management consultancy, so it's different. If you're in a big, large operational test, how many folks you got on your team?
At least 400, just kidding.
Yeah, okay. So like, you know what, it's the same BS problems whether it's 400 or 4, yeah? What I always did is look at my week every week and just go through where I spent my time, right? And just kind of top grade where I spent my effort. And I always had this rule of, again, a kind of Pareto rule of 80-20. I spent 80% of my energy with the 20% of people that were providing me benefit and constantly refocus on what did I get out of last week that I can refocus this week. The other thing I would do is I would take a month, right, and cancel all your meetings. Your meetings, ones you book, right? One that you're calling, right? And see how that goes, right? And it's just the same thing like I used to have, because like you get flooded with your inbox, when you've got that many people working for you, or just in general, and so if I'm CC'd on something, I don't reply, right? And I would usually give people 2 or 3 days that weren't a direct report, and if they then sent it again, then I knew it was important, right? Because there's so much noise coming at you. But I would cancel all your meetings for a month and see which ones you actually missed. Like missed in terms of those were important things that I wanted. And that just by nature will cut it down to practically nothing. And then just the 10, I can't remember who said it, but a good rule for meetings, because so much of your operational time is taken up in BS meetings, only go to meetings that can't start without you, right? If a meeting can start without you, you don't need to be there.
We had a question from Poll EV, then we're going to go to the audience here in a minute. But one question from Poll EV we had was, what is advice on screening out a bad tester?
Advice on how to?
Screening them out, like making sure they don't show up.
I just told you.
Yeah. What's something else maybe that you would think of?
Look, I don't know what a bad tester is. What I've seen is like unmotivated people or people who might be in the wrong job, right? And so I think there's a subtlety there, and I wouldn't want to. A bad tester is somebody who I think, for all those things I mentioned, doesn't investigate their craft, isn't interested in it, But I don't think that necessarily makes somebody bad. I would say they're probably unmotivated, I would work with them on refocusing it. And frankly, I've worked with folks. I think testing, and I'm a big fan of the rapid software testing model, that's how to teach people how to test, is about critical thinking skills. And I've got folks who've worked in my teams BAs, somebody's doing their JD now at the University of Chicago. I'm a big advocate of a critical thinking skill set, and the testing skill set can help you in lots of other roles. So I'm an advocate for people working in testing for a while and maybe trying something else, so. I think part of the problem is that lots of places, I won't say most, lots of places where people testing's happening, it sucks to work there.
Raw deal, okay.
So I'm Dave Cantrell. I'm one of those test managers that needs to be fired. And I have a pedantic question.
That light is like shining right at me, I'm sorry.
So I have a pedantic question. Your session was supposed to go for an hour. It ended after half an hour. Did you inflate your estimate or did you over-deliver?
It ended right when it was supposed to. I also got called down 10 minutes early, and I tend to talk too fast, so apologies for that. But that's, you got 15 minutes of your life back.
Happy question. Here we go.
Keith, in your experience, how did you, over the years, what are the things you found that really helps in getting the BAs to really write nice, clear, testable requirements?
Well, see, I don't look at, like when I want something from somebody, I don't put the onus on that person. I put it on me to figure out how to do that translation. So, I mean, I don't know, like, is a BA still a role? I mean, I don't know a lot of places have BAs, but if you do, right, I mean, I would work with them on you helping them write a testable requirement as opposed to expecting them to be able to do it, right? I tell my test teams, if you feel like you're not being valued, that's your fault, right? So testability is a huge thing. If your BA doesn't get that you can't, do as complete a test as you want, or you can't get inside of something, you can't understand it. I mean, that's like, you got the antidote and you've labeled it jelly. You know what I mean? It's like you've got something that they need, and they don't understand yet from you why it's important. So I would turn that around and say, how can you, right, work with them to write testable requirements? I wouldn't expect them to just do it. I think you need to sit down with them and work with them on how to do it, right? And also explain to them, so like objective alignment, right? So how those things, align. You having a better testable requirement helps them meet their objectives in terms of getting product out.
Question from somebody here from a newspaper copy editing background has said that, basically from his background, that if he were to use this pedantic arguments that you kind of talked about today, that's not really viewed as a compliment. So how can we do like pedantic arguments or be encouraged by that when sometimes it's not really viewed
well? I mean, exactly. So I would say trying to get to the meaning of things, right? So trying to come to some level of understanding. You might want to call it. You might not want to call it a pedantic argument, but we can all agree that we want to understand what people mean. And this in our business kind of rears its head a lot in the QA versus testing, right? So and I've told this story before about working with a guy who he is hardcore context-driven testing school tester. He does not, you can't A the Q, you know what I mean? He says, so we don't call it QA, we call it testing, right? And so I'm sitting in a meeting with him and a client, and the client calls it QA. He's like, so, the other day when we QA'd this thing, and, this guy's like, oh, you mean you tested it? He's like, well, yeah, but then we sent it to the QA team. He's like, oh, so the test team had it. And I'm like under the table trying to kick this guy. I'm like, well, you just all you do is piss people off when you get into that kind of micro, passive aggressive word correction, right? But it's important, they know what they're talking about. So why play that game, right? But the meaning was already shared. So I would focus on meaning then as opposed to calling it a pedantic argument. But
there was a quick question from here that you can answer real quick. What was the name of the book by Harry Collins that you said?
Rethinking Expertise.
Okay.
If you go on my, they took the slide down. If you go on my, I think they're going to post these slides on my blog. Most of the books that I mention when I give talks are out there.
Okay. So you talk about, you say fire test managers dealing with people who don't like testing. Of course, we're going to focus on that. How do you personally deal with the human aspect of that? Because nobody wants to hear, well, you should fire test managers or...
It was a bit of hyperbole, but, you mean
it's a cultural
how do I
shift
go
that you're
about
really
firing
working
people?
towards. Well, no, just in general.
There's
How do
usually
you-
HR in the
how do you
room, and we're all sat
work
around a
with
table.
people to really have this cultural shift of looking at, principle-driven opposed to numbers. I mean, that's a huge shift in a company.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with the human aspect of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing you need to do is kind of live those values yourself, right? So if they don't see you doing that, there absolutely no one's going to follow you, right? So that's a big part of it, and being super open and honest with your team. Secondly, my experience has been when I implement that model somewhere on a test team, the folks that aren't going to go on that journey with us, boy, that sounded awful, didn't it? I hate management speak. Who aren't going to do it, self-select out. Most people won't, they for whatever reason, and I will gently let them go. Some folks I try and, be on board with it, but some folks just, particularly the process weenie folks, are just they can't redefine themselves in terms of producing widgets. So if they can't count stuff, they're just going to go, and, it's a green field for companies that still want you to count things, right? So there's lots of those jobs, right? So they can go find that somewhere else. The ones that are really hard to root out, or at least find so I can help focus their energy, is the ones that don't like testing and act like they do, You know, those are the hard ones. But that's, you got to get to know your folks, and I think changing the objectives, people are like, oh, that sounds great, that's what I want to do. And then you're like, wait a minute, you know, I actually have to think about what I'm doing and how it's demonstrating these values, not just from a corporate slogan perspective. That's probably the biggest cultural change. But you'll see folks in that system just rise to the top. We're like, live it and do it, and it's easier to reward people that way.
Hello, I'm going to stick to that topic again about firing test managers. I'm a test
I can't wait to
manager.
look at my Twitter feed later. Keith Klain says, fire all your test managers.
I'm one of those test managers, but I mean, what about the alternative? Because in our group, our test managers are very hands-on. A lot of them are doing the testing. They do a lot of test strategy, help out with the test strategies on the team. You know, escalations, all that good stuff. But I mean, why not the alternative and having your test managers be, like you were talking about earlier, more, they're doing testing on the team, and they're also helping manage and making sure that the processes are flowing down across the group.
Does she work, you a test manager, you work together? Because
Yeah.
you're like looking at me like,
Yeah,
arms
so-
crossed. Look,
So they help
That's
with
that's what I'm advocating for, right?
Yeah.
All that stuff you're talking about, that's what I think test managers
And
should,
that's what we
should
do. That's what we
so
do.
you're
Okay.
no danger there, right? So that's I'm talking about a lot of places that don't do that, right?
Hi.